In the quiet winter dawn of December 26, 1996, a 6-year-old girl vanished from a luxurious home on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado. Hours later, she would be found dead in the basement of that same house, her life stolen, her body discovered beneath a blanket, and the world forever changed. If you want to uncover the truth behind this chilling case, make sure to hit subscribe and join us as we piece the mystery together. From the moment parents reported her missing, something about this case didn't add up. A ransom note demanding $118,000 was found, but no contact was ever made. Investigators found no sign of forced entry, yet the girl was found bound and strangled with a garrote made from a broken paintbrush handle in the home she lived in. Stay tuned, because what happened here will shock you, and we'll explore the hidden details soon. Make sure to subscribe. Despite intense investigation, conflicting evidence, and thousands of leads, no suspect has ever been charged in this crime. At one point, trace DNA was identified that did not match any family member, and in 2008, the Ramseys were formally excluded as contributors by DNA testing. But even that clue didn't point directly to a perpetrator. What led authorities to pursue dead-end leads for years? What critical evidence was overlooked or misunderstood? Tell us what you think happened. Drop your theory in the comments below. Nearly 30 decades later, law enforcement continues to revisit this case with new interviews and advanced forensic testing, driven by technology that wasn't available in the 1990s. Families, investigators, and interested viewers still hope that justice can finally be served. Don't forget to hit the bell so you'll be the first to know when we update with stories like this. JonBenet Ramsey was 6 years old, a child whose smile and energy lit up every room she entered. Born into a family with loving parents who doted on her, she was known for her bright blue eyes, her laughter, and a joy that seemed to come naturally to her. Her days were filled with ordinary childhood moments that many of us remember with fondness. School lessons, playtime in the backyard, and evenings spent with her parents. In the months before her death, JonBenet's life included something that set her apart from many children her age. She competed in beauty pageants. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, often took photographs of her in dresses, tiaras, and sparkling outfits. But those events were more than trophies. They were places where JonBenet made friends, smiled at the camera, and danced around with carefree delight. She wasn't a performance or a title, she was a child living out moments many parents treasure. December 25, 1996 began like many Christmas days. The Ramsey family spent the morning together, opening gifts and sharing laughter. Neighbors later said JonBenet seemed happy and animated, a child enjoying the warmth and noise of holiday festivities. Those images, the family scenes, the joy in her eyes, are the ones friends and relatives want us to remember. That night, JonBenet went to bed as the household grew quiet. Her father, John Ramsey, later said she fell asleep after dinner, surrounded by the sounds of holiday calm. There were no warnings, no signs that anything was amiss. There was nothing to suggest that in less than 12 hours, everything ordinary about her life would be erased. What was supposed to be a normal next morning never came. The routine, waking up to breakfast, play, and another day of childhood was abruptly interrupted when her absence was noticed. The scene that awaited investigators was far from the joyful snapshots of her life. It was a discovery that stopped a community in its tracks. Was her family hiding something? What could have happened to a child so full of life? Let's discuss in the comments below. As daylight broke on December 26, 1996, the initial response to JonBenet's disappearance brought with it a wave of urgency. Local police were on the scene within minutes of the call from the Ramsey home. Neighbors, reporters, and volunteers gathered, ready to help find a missing child. In those first hours, there was hope. The belief that someone, somewhere, would hold the key to unlocking this frightening mystery. The first major piece of evidence emerged quickly: a handwritten ransom note left on the stairs in the Ramsey home. It demanded $118,000 for John Bonet's safe return, an oddly specific amount that matched John Ramsey's recent year-end bonus. The note was long, detailed, and unlike anything investigators had seen before in a kidnap for ransom situation. But almost immediately, questions began to surface. Investigators noted the lack of forced entry, no signs of a struggle in the living areas, and no confirmed sighting of an intruder. The ransom note's language and composition raised eyebrows among seasoned detectives. Was this a genuine attempt at extortion, or a staged message meant to mislead? Adding to the complexity was another crucial piece of evidence: a palm print found on a doorframe in the basement where John Bonet's body would later be discovered. At first, it seemed promising, a physical trace left by someone who might have been there during the crime. But that print did not match any family member, and exhaustive comparisons to known suspects came up empty. In these early days, investigators chased promising leads. Multiple neighborhoods were canvassed. Friends, acquaintances, musicians who had performed at a recent local benefit, and even strangers seen in the area were brought in for questioning. Each new lead sparked a wave of excitement among detectives, only for it to fade into confusion when evidence failed to support the theory. As the investigation unfolded on live television and in front-page headlines, the pressure on law enforcement grew. Critics argued the crime scene wasn't properly secured, which allowed contamination of physical evidence. Others pointed to the sheer number of false alarms, supposed tips that led nowhere, as a sign that the focus was too broad, too unfocused. Then, after weeks of intense investigation, it all slowed. The frantic pace of leads, interviews, and forensic tests suddenly eased into uncertainty. Promising lines of inquiry fizzled out. Tips dried up. What once felt like momentum shifted to dead ends. The public watched, waiting for answers that never came. Do you think the investigation could have gone differently with the right resources? Comment below and let us know what you think might have changed the course of this case.
As the weeks turned into months, what began as a frantic search for answers slowly faded into silence. In the early days after John Bonet's death, investigators were mobilized, evidence was collected, and leads were followed around the clock. But time has a way of blurring certainty, and in this case, it began to wash away momentum. By early 1997, much of the initial investigative energy had shifted. Detectives faced a patchwork of unresolved clues, contradictory witness accounts, and evidence that raised more questions than it answered. The once urgent flow of tips slowed dramatically. Newspapers that had filled front pages with daily updates started moving on to new headlines. The public's appetite for answers was still there, but the trail had grown cold. For the Ramsey family, the cost of that slowdown was deeply personal. In interviews over the years, John Bonet's father, John Ramsey, spoke about the emotional toll of living in limbo, describing a sense of being trapped between seeking justice and grieving a daughter they could not protect. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, maintained her daughter's innocence and called for clarity even as the investigation shifted away from active inquiry. At the same time, law enforcement grappled with its own frustration. New forensic technologies like advanced DNA analysis were on the horizon, but in the late 1990s, they weren't yet available. Investigators had physical evidence, but the tools needed to interpret it with precision simply did not exist yet. As a result, key pieces of the puzzle remained unanalyzed or inconclusive. Media coverage, once intense and unrelenting, began to soften. What was once the nation's most discussed unsolved crime became a story relegated to anniversary pieces and retrospective articles. Public interest remained steady among true crime followers, but for many casual observers, the case had slipped into the realm of unsolved mystery rather than active investigation. And yet, the questions never disappeared. What if new technology could finally unlock what was hidden in evidence long overlooked? What if there was a detail no one saw because everyone was looking in the wrong direction? What if the answers were always there, but buried beneath assumptions made in the earliest hours? Do you think the case was mishandled? Share your thoughts with us.
Even after decades have passed, this case has never lacked theories. As evidence grew confusing and investigators reached dead ends, speculation filled the space left by answers. Over the years, several major possibilities have surfaced, each with its supporters, each with its critics, and none have closed the case. One of the earliest and most discussed theories is the idea of an intruder. A segment of investigators and outside experts have pointed to the foreign male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, a genetic profile that did not match any member of the Ramsey family. Some believe this evidence points to someone entering the home that night, someone unknown to the family, who may have committed this crime and fled without detection. Supporters of this view often cite the lack of forced entry elsewhere in the house, suggesting that the intruder may have found another way inside, or was someone the family unknowingly knew. Yet, critics of this idea note that without witnesses or physical proof of unauthorized entry, this remains speculative. Another major theory focuses on the Ramsey family themselves. In the earliest years of the investigation, law enforcement publicly acknowledged they were treating them as possible suspects. Some analysts believe that inconsistencies in interviews and timing might indicate involvement or cover-up. However, in 2008, advanced DNA testing formally excluded John and Patsy Ramsey as contributors to the DNA evidence found on the victim, a development that shifted much of the conversation away from family involvement. There are also theories that point to accidental death followed by panic. Proponents of this explanation suggest JonBenet could have been harmed unintentionally, perhaps during a rough play or unforeseen accident, leading to a frantic attempt to fabricate a ransom note. But this hypothesis also stumbles over unanswered questions, such as why key evidence was left in place and why the ransom note was so specifically detailed. Over time, more nuanced suggestions have emerged. Some theorists propose the involvement of someone who wasn't originally on the investigation's radar, maybe a neighbor, delivery driver, or person passing through the area. Others have focused on reconstructing the crime scene, questioning exactly where and when the death occurred, whether it was immediately after midnight or later in the night when fewer people were awake in the quiet household. What makes this case especially complex is not just a number of theories, but the ways in which they intersect and contradict one another. A timeline chart of the evidence from the discovery of the ransom note to the DNA test that came decades later reveals a web rather than a straight line. Every theory raises new questions. If an outsider did it, why nothing taken? If it was a tragic accident, why fabricate a ransom note? If someone close to the case was involved, how did they avoid detection entirely? Which theory do you think holds the most weight? Or is it something entirely different? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. For nearly 3 decades, the absence of answers has been a burden, not just for investigators, but for everyone connected to this case. The Ramsey family, once a picture of holiday warmth, found themselves trapped in a loop of grief that never resolved. JonBenét's parents were thrust into the spotlight immediately after her death. Instead of private mourning, they faced public scrutiny, speculation, and suspicion. At memorial services, behind the flowers and photographs, there was a palpable tension, a blend of sorrow and uncertainty that never fully lifted. Those silent moments, captured in family interviews and home videos, reflect a pain that words alone cannot convey. Over the years, John Ramsey spoke publicly about the emotional toll of living without resolution. In interviews, he described how every anniversary, Every holiday returned him to that moment of loss, forcing him to relive what he still cannot fully understand. For him, grief was not a chapter that closed, it was a story without an ending. For John Bonet's older brother, Burke, the struggle was different but no less profound. From a young age, he grew up under a cloud of speculation and suspicion. As he became an adult, he tried to live a life outside the case's shadow, yet the questions never stopped. The world watched, analyzed, and debated even when the Ramsey family simply needed space to mourn. The emotional cost extends beyond the immediate family. The community of Boulder, Colorado, felt the shock of this crime for years. Neighbors who once waved at each other on quiet streets now carried a subtle, lingering fear that something unimaginable could happen in a place that once seemed safe. Every holiday season revived memories of John Bonet's last Christmas, and every news update reminded the public that answers had not arrived. Grief without closure is a weight that never fully lifts. It settles into the daily routines of life, into the silent pauses between conversations, into memories that both comfort and torment. For the Ramseys and for everyone who has followed this case, the unanswered questions are not just mysteries on a timeline. They are reminders of what was lost and what has never been recovered. What is the true cost of not knowing the truth? Tell us how you feel about this case in the comments. After decades of unanswered questions, the story of John Benet Ramsey continues to challenge investigators, experts, and the public alike. What began on a quiet winter night in Boulder, Colorado, has transformed into one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. We have walked through the hope and confusion of the early investigation, the tangled web of theories, and the emotional cost carried by a family that never received closure. Along the way, advances in forensic science brought new tools and techniques that were once unimaginable, yet the central truth remains elusive. Despite the years that have passed, law enforcement continues to revisit this case. Detectives re-examine evidence, interview new witnesses, and apply modern forensic methods to old clues, hopefully that breakthroughs once thought impossible might now be within reach. John Bonet's story is more than just a case file on a shelf. It is a reminder that real people, a child and her family, lived through this tragedy, and the ripples of that night extend far beyond the confines of the original investigation. The unanswered questions are not just mysteries on paper. They represent the search for truth that so many still demand. Could this still be solved? Could the advances of tomorrow finally illuminate what was hidden in the shadows of 1996? Some investigators believe so. Others remain skeptical. What every perspective shares is this: the world still wants answers. What's your theory? Could we ever know the truth? Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on this case and join the conversation. Share your thoughts, your questions, and your reflections below, because some mysteries stay with us not just because they lack answers, but because they touch the very core of human curiosity and compassion.